Hi, Steve. Thank you for joining us today and meeting up with the 61 financial investors. Could you please give us some background of Imricor and the recent progress, also the outlook of Imricor in the short future? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. During this presentation, I will review at a very high level what we do at Imricor and why. Then I'll discuss our current situation regarding the effects of the pandemic. And finally, I will discuss where we're going in the future and take any questions. At Imricor, we make Mri-compatible cardiac ablation tools. These are tools that allow doctors to perform cardiac ablation procedures guided by real-time MRI. And the benefits of performing cardiac procedures guided by real-time MRI are that unlike X-ray imaging used today, with MRI imaging, the cardiac tissue is visible to the doctors. So the doctors can see what they're working on, and also they can see the results of their therapy as they ablate tissues, all in a setting that is radiation-free for the patient and the medical personnel. And one final thing about to talk about during this slide is that with all of these advantages, the cost of performing MRI-guided ablations with Imricor's technology is similar to the cost of performing these ablations conventionally. So our solution doesn't cost the hospital or the physicians more money to do. Our revenue model is based primarily on the sale of capital equipment and consumable devices. These are shown on the left side of this particular slide. Our capital equipment is essentially what we call our Advantage-MR EP recorder and stimulator system, which is the device that displays the electrical activity of the heart that is recorded or captured by our catheters. And the consumables are the catheters themselves. These are single-use devices, so each procedure they're used once and then disposed of. And these two things, a one-time capital equipment sale and recurring revenue from the consumable sales, forms the base and core of our revenue stream. We also, however, perform consulting services and research services for, in particular, the United States National Institutes of Health as we look toward new indications and new devices for the future. And we do some licensing of our patents to various implanted device companies. But these licensing revenues, again, are minimal compared to the capital equipment and consumable sales that we are moving forward. On this slide, we show a bit of the market for catheter ablation. And so the market is currently about $4 billion US worldwide. And this is for the catheter sales, so the consumable portion of the revenue model I mentioned before. It does not include the capital equipment. So we're addressing about a $4 billion worldwide market. It is growing anywhere from 8 to, around 8% annually. And one of the things that we expect will continue to happen is this growth will accelerate as more and more procedures move to minimally invasive techniques, and as Imricor's MRI-guided technology provides better outcomes for patients so that more patients can be treated with this, an ablation procedure rather than drug therapy. So let's talk a minute about COVID-19. During the pandemic, of course, hospitals closed throughout Europe where our market release has started. And that has resulted in lower consumable sales, of course, and the lab adoption rate to be slower than we had originally planned before the pandemic occurred. But we've adapted nicely. We have training and installation teams that are in Europe. We support them remotely with teams in the United States. So even through the pandemic, we have been able to establish new sites, install our system, train hospitals, and get them up and running doing these procedures. It's been slower than expected, but we've done what we can given the local restrictions at various places around Europe. We are, at the same time, we've redeployed our manufacturing workforce. We didn't need to build as much inventory, so we've shifted those people to help our R&D department in building consumable devices for upcoming clinical trials. And we've moved our marketing opportunities from in-person seminars like we normally would do and education programs to virtual and online programs. All of that is about to come to an end as the COVID wanes here in the United States, and also is on a good track to putting it behind us in Europe as well. we expect to get back to in-person education, in-person seminars, and a much more in-person engagement with our physician customers. This slide shows a bit of what I just mentioned then. You can see that as the first wave of COVID in Europe came and subsided, we got back on track last autumn, so August and September, and in October signed 5 new agreements with labs, and we thought things were getting back to normal. But the second wave of COVID was prolonged and not as well tolerated as the first wave of COVID in Europe. And so that provided some difficulties through the early part of this year. We did get started at our newest site, the Maastricht University Medical Center in the Netherlands. And we also commenced cases at the Leipzig Heart Center in Germany, all of this in March. But this was followed now, as you can see by the graph, with the third wave in Europe that is currently being handled. And the really good news out of Europe right now is that while they are dealing with their third wave, vaccinations are increasing and accelerating. So we see a clear path to a post-COVID era in Europe when hospital operations can get back to normal. Elective procedures can happen again, and we can begin again installing more sites and growing our installed base. So the good news is that while COVID did impact negatively our sales forecasts and our sales performance, we were able to do many things that we were otherwise already planning to do during COVID, and we accomplished everything that we had in the background planned to do during that time. We have several important agreements that we put in place with top MR manufacturers like Philips and Siemens. This will help with our distribution of our labs, and it's a partnership that allows us to leverage the sales force of these large medical device companies instead of having to grow one all on our own. We've also made important agreements with hospital groups like the Zana Hospital Group, shown here on this slide, and third-party medical device equipment manufacturers like Osipka, who make an optical communication set for an MR, Osipka, which makes an MR-compatible ablation generator to be used with our system. And most recently, we've signed with Regional Healthcare Group in Australia, who will be our exclusive distributor of our disposables, our consumable devices in Australia and New Zealand, and also help facilitate TGA approval. So all of these agreements were meant to help us grow our installed base, make sure that we can provide all the equipment that our hospitals and customers will need, that we have access to those hospitals, and that we grow our geography beyond just Europe, but also into Australia and New Zealand. And we've also, as we plan to grow the number of procedures that doctors can perform with our products, we've had to grow the set of products that we can provide to hospitals. So our product development group has been busy throughout the pandemic. We've delivered a diagnostic catheter, which has been submitted for CE mark, and we are just finishing what is called a Transeptal Puncture Kit, which is what you see on the right here. It's a steerable sheath and transeptal needle that allows a doctor to pass catheters from the right side of the heart into the left side of the heart to perform procedures like atrial fibrillation ablation or ventricular tachycardia ablation. Both of these are important advancements in our product line, and these product development initiatives have stayed on track throughout the pandemic. And now looking more to the future, we have our lab roll-up status today is that we have 10 sites that have agreements signed with Imricor now, who will begin doing cases once the pandemic restrictions are lifted, and we have the ability at some of the newest sites to do our installation and training. And we have a strong pipeline of new sites that are coming into the final stages of our sales process, where we'll sign them and then get them started as well. And we're looking at a real acceleration in our site expansion through the second half of the year. We do believe it'll still be slow and gradual for the next couple of months, and then accelerate beyond that. But there's a lot of interest in Imricor's products in the market, and so this pipeline, this backlog of sites that want to do these procedures continues to grow. And so while we talked about product line expansion, so we can sell more products into to do more different types of procedures. And by growing our installed base, the more hospitals that can do our procedures. Another important aspect of our strategy moving forward is to grow the number of regions and geographies that can perform these procedures. So again, we're starting in the EU, and we are working toward Australian and New Zealand distribution, as well as approvals in the United States with the FDA. And these are other plans that include a lot of work regarding clinical trials, regulatory approvals, and so forth. And all of this work is more work that we were able to continue to do unfettered by the COVID pandemic. So we are in the same spot today that we would have been if there had been no pandemic. And so we're in a great spot now as we look forward with none of those timelines slipping to be able to expand beyond Europe into the United States and into the AP market, in particular Australia and New Zealand. And so our focus on the year ahead as we look into the end of 2021 is to continue growing our sites, to continue increasing the utilization of our Philips sales force to drive that increased site adoption, and the continued development of this pipeline through our marketing activities, especially as we get back to doing these things in person in collaboration with Siemens and Philips. Our second generation ablation catheter will be submitted for CE mark approval. We have already submitted the diagnostic catheter that I showed you a moment ago, and the steerable sheath and transeptal needle, that Transeptal Puncture Kit, will be ready for clinical trials toward the end of this year. And then finally, our growth initiatives are to, again, progress those regulatory approvals to expand to the United States and Australia, to expand clinical trials in Europe to grow the number of indications, the different types of procedures they can do with our catheters. And then also, something I haven't mentioned till now is to progress the development of a new type of device that is also used, guided by real-time MRI. And this is an MRI-compatible biopsy system, a system that allows a doctor, when they can see the heart and see a diseased area of the heart, to direct a catheter to that location and take a small biopsy for diagnostic purposes. This is a project that's been funded by the United States National Institutes of Health as an important medical advancement that they wanted to see. And we've won that contract, so we are being reimbursed for the development of that. And we think that will mark the first product line expansion of Imricor's interventional products in MRI that goes beyond the catheter ablation market or the cardiac ablation market. And so with that, I think it's a good time to perhaps open up to questions, and I can fill in any additional details.
Sure. We have some pre-collected questions. The first about, like, as mentioned, the COVID has impacted the procedures in Europe, and these days seems like another wave in India is going more serious. You have mentioned the vaccine is accelerated in the Europe, but will the wave in India could be a potential threat into current expansion progress in Europe, or any backup plan to avoid the potential delay in procedures caused by the hospital, another closure, and elective procedures restrictions that are related to COVID?
Sure. So our short-term plans, so short-term being the next 12 months, for instance, are to focus on commercialization only within Europe, and it will be longer term plans to expand into other geographies. And so as we look at CE marking, what's important is that the hospitals and their staff are fully vaccinated so that they can safely treat patients, and that the population in any region of a hospital has low enough case rates where elective procedures are not prohibitive. And that's what we're seeing now starting to happen, is that procedure rates are falling, vaccination rates are rising. And so we expect that within the European Union, we will have things getting back to normal in the second half of the year, which will get us back on track. The very unfortunate situation in India, we don't see that causing an impact to our next 12 months worth of forecasts.
The second question is like, with Australia and US will apply the same expansion initiatives that what Imricor do in Europe, I sign a range of hospital sites and also under the partnership with Philips and Siemens. But I think in the slides you were mentioned that Australia will be already signed with another like a regional to do the distribution. But what about the US market? And also in the Australian market, also it will be also in the partnership with Philips and Siemens.
Yeah, so let's talk about Australia and New Zealand first with Regional Healthcare Group. The Regional Healthcare Group will be our exclusive distributor of the consumable devices, but non-exclusive distributor of our capital equipment, because our capital equipment will still be able to be sold by Philips and eventually by Siemens as well as part of an overall lab package. And so there will be multiple ways that the capital equipment can be sold, but Regional Healthcare Group will be the sole distributor of our consumable devices, the catheters themselves. In the United States, we'll follow more closely the model that we have in Europe, which is direct sales, where we leverage our partners, Siemens and Philips, and eventually General Electric as well, to help grow awareness of our products and grow our installed base. But we expect a direct sales force with respect to our catheters.
The third question is, why chose Europe as the place to commence and conduct procedures? That the introduction of the ICMR labs and Imricor products need regulation approval as like FDA and TGA in US and Australia, or can these products be brought in these countries for maybe like clinical data collecting or trial purpose without like prior to acquire this kind of approvals?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. Is the question, why did we start our commercialization efforts in Europe rather than in the United States?
Yeah, that's one part of the question. And also, because we know that the CE mark has been, you already got the approval of the CE mark. I guess that could be the reason that it started in Europe. But is that possible to get into US and Australia without approval, but not like a commercialization, but like collecting data or something like trials that in that form to get into this market?
I understand. Yes. So we had a choice when we chose, at the time we chose where to commercialize first. Wherever we commercialized, we would have to do a clinical trial and provide clinical safety and effectiveness data to regulatory bodies wherever we went. At that particular time, the US FDA was asking Imricor if we would partner with them to help identify the testing and modeling and math associated with the electromagnetic compatibility of devices like ours and MRI. So while we were doing this research with the FDA, we felt it was best for us to start our clinical and commercial efforts in Europe so that there was no conflict between our research efforts in the United States and our commercial efforts in the United States. That's why we started in Europe. Now, with our research complete with FDA, we are coming and bringing our research, we're bringing our commercial efforts back to the United States and pursuing FDA approvals, which will include clinical trials here in the United States as well, to grow this geography as a place that we could sell our devices. In Australia, it is a little bit simpler than in the United States because we can take our CE mark data, the data that we use to gain approval in Europe, and essentially submit that to TGA for their secondary review. And when they review it, if they're satisfied, then we can gain approvals without having to do a clinical trial in Australia.
The fourth question is there any plan to do a listing on another exchange market?
We don't have any plans to do a listing on any other exchange market at this time.
Thank you. What about the cash position? Any capital raising plan to support a further product development and commercial plan?
So at the end of the last quarter, we ended the quarter with a little over $20 million US of cash balance. We are burning about $2 million per month, but sales will start to ramp up now as we enter the second half of the year as well. So what we're doing at this time is we're conserving cash by, we've slowed our hiring a bit, and we're getting by to make sure we can accomplish what we need to accomplish with fewer people. but also keeping a very close eye on our cash balance and how the sales ramp up as COVID wanes. And so we have no immediate plans right now for future cash raisings, but we do keep a very close eye on it.
Thank you. And the next question is, how much is the capital equipment for each unit, and also the estimated selling price of these consumable products? How much the revenues can be generated from each site, or if there's a range, like averagely in these hospitals, the revenue can be generated. And also about the target gross margin. You said a second generation of the ablation catheter is aimed to somehow increase and improve the gross margin. So how much the target gross margin and the current gross margin and the target gross margin? Thank you.
Okay, so starting with the capital equipment sells for about 150 to 180,000 euro. And we expect that although that they have a very strong margin on that particular system. So we may, especially in the context of COVID, as capital budgets are constrained, we may reduce that price a bit to make it easier for hospitals to adopt in the coming year. When it comes to the consumables, we make about $4,000 US dollars per procedure. So it really becomes a matter of how many procedures a hospital can do each week or each year. And our expectation is that hospitals can do about 100 to 130 procedures per year on average once they get back to normal operations. And in terms of the next generation catheter, we put some performance improvements in it to help it as we started to move to other parts of the heart to be able to maneuver to those parts of the heart. But at the same time, we added cost savings with respect to lower cost components, simpler designs, more manufacturability. Ultimately, what we expect, and our gross margins now are hard to report and not as meaningful because we're just beginning our commercialization. So we sell so few devices and we have the normal overhead associated with manufacturing. So it's not as meaningful right now. Our target for margins is in 65 to 75% range.
Okay, that's pretty much the questions for now we get. So thank you very much for having us today. Very impressive presentation. We hope that more people can understand Imricor potentials and hope the progress of the expansion in regions and development of products can be very smooth and successful.
Thank you very much.